Chandler Jones get it going. That more this week on the IDP Blitz. Very happy to be joined by Gary Davenport. If you don't know him, you play IDP. What's wrong with you at IDP Sharks? So happy to have him as part of the Footballguys IDP team. We're going to go through some studs and duds from the first couple of weeks, Gary, and take a shot at whether they're going to change things around or whether things can change for them. And starting out with Chandler Jones, you saw that defensive end designation. Breathe a sigh of relief when you put him in your lineup. You get frustrated. How's it going to go this week against Tennessee and going forward?
You know, if he can't get it going this week against Tennessee, then it will be time for frustration to give way to panic. You know, we kind of knew this about Chandler Jones. He's always been kind of a streaky guy. He's going to post huge weeks, and then he'll vanish for a week or two. I mean, you look at last year, you look at the 10.5 sacks he had for the season, it looks great on the surface, but 5 of those sacks came in week 1, and then in 3 of the 4 games following that, he didn't post any stats at all. So you just kind of have to live with the ups and downs. Tennessee should be a good matchup. I think he'll bounce back this week. By the end of the year, he'll wind up, you know, in that 10 to 12 range among defensive linemen, most likely.
Yeah, with Taylor Lewin now out for the season, likely out for the season, even fewer excuses. Let's go through the guys that we want to get the engine to turn over. Trey Hendrickson was a revelation for the Bengals. A lot of things wrong with the Bengals. I think their pass rush isn't that high on the list, maybe stopping other teams' pass rush. But for IDP teams, we need to know if we can trust Trey Hendrickson this week against the Jets.
Hendrickson's another guy who's going to be kind of a streaky option. I mean, he just is. He's so reliant on sacks for his production. I don't think he's ever had 30 tackles in a season. So if he doesn't get home against the quarterback, he's just not going to put up numbers. I like the matchup this week. I wasn't crazy about Hendrickson this year, if only because he is so sack reliant, and unless he hits, 12, 13, 14 sacks, it will be hard for him to live up to his asking price in drafts. But I think he'll probably finish at least as a decent DL2. Yeah. I don't know if he's going to live up to ADP, though.
Yeah, as goes the Bengals' fortunes in general. We may see better game scripts and so on for him. That could get things started. Shaquille Leonard hasn't even gotten started yet this year, and it was a little troubling to see that his leg issue turned into a back issue because of something nerve related, and we know he had issues with his ankle. What can people look forward to? Is there even anything to look forward to right now with Leonard?
If we don't see him on the field this week, because you would think it's all hands on deck for the Colts after what happened last week against Jacksonville, and they're taking on Kansas City. If we don't see him on the field this weekend, then yeah, that's another guy where it's going to be time to hit the panic button. And even then, you have to wonder. Excuse me. Goodness. Even once he does, goodness gracious. Even once he does hit the field, you have to wonder how long it's going to take him to get up to speed. So.
Yeah, well, and this is the point, Gary. We're getting into that range where if players were not put on injured reserve, because injured reserve is only minimum 4 weeks.
Right.
So if a player wasn't put on injured reserve and it's 3 weeks in and they still haven't been able to play, it does make you wonder, was there a setback? Is the injury not responding the way they had hoped? And with Leonard, I mean, there's few in the game better than him, just heaping on to the problems. Now, we saw last year Foyesade Oluokun with the Falcons just rack up tackles in that safety / linebacker. Not even so much the role, just the type of player that he is. You see Jacksonville go on a spending spree this offseason. And they also took Devin Lloyd by the way, Devin Lloyd looked really good last week. Devin Lloyd looks like he's going to be a player right away. What about Oluokun, who we could count on last year? Can we count on him this week against the Chargers?
I figured we were going to see some regression out of Oluokun, if only because, I mean, he had 100 plus solos and 90 plus assists last year. And it's not repeatable. It's not going to happen 2 years in a row. I didn't expect that he would regress this much. And I don't love the matchup against the Chargers. So I would probably slot Oluokun more in LB2 territory this week. And I fear that's where he's going to wind up this year, which means that, I mean, it's not disastrous for people that drafted him as an LB1, but I don't know if he's going to live up to that top 12 price tag. And Lloyd is part of it. I mean, he has been as advertised and then some. And, every tackle Lloyd makes is one that Oluokun's not. So
Jaguars are going to mess around and win that division, aren't they? Going to host a playoff game with 7 wins.
Somebody has to win it.
Right?
Nobody wants
to. Truly, they're the only team that has a win, so that's a good place to start. All right, Justin Reid, we were looking through our IDP scoring settings to see if you got points for kicking stats from your IDPs, but it'd be nice to get some good old IDP stats from Reid. Could we get some this week against Indy?
I'm not loving Reid this year, and I liked him coming into the season, but that role in Kansas City. Now, over the next month, we may see a bit of an uptick with Willie Gay suspended. I wonder if we're going to see more 3 safety looks from the Chiefs, so maybe we'll see Reid spend some more time in the box. But those Kansas City safeties have never really been fantasy gold. I mean, Tyrann Mathieu was good, but he was big play dependent. He relied on those interceptions and forced fumbles for a lot of his numbers. So if you drafted Reid as a DB2, I don't know that you're going to get those kind of numbers out of him. And depending on what's out there on your waiver wire, if you could get a Brandon Jones or a Talanoa Hufanga, who we'll talk about in a moment, I might move on. I have a very short leash with defensive backs. 2 bad weeks, I'm looking at the waiver wire. 3 bad weeks, you're gone.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to do it, especially because of the rotation through the waiver wire. You can pick up some guys. We might be getting to the end of our patience. Also, if we're talking about disappointing players for 2 weeks. We're talking about a lot of Bengals, right? Jessie Bates, who did miss camp. We don't really take note of that as much. Kind of the hold in. He finally just relented and signed his franchise tag. This week, it's kind of a make or break game for the Bengals against the Jets. Will he make or break your lineup?
I would probably bench Bates this week. I don't know that I'm trying to be patient with Bates. And like you said, he didn't play in camp. And I think that's part of the reason why so many teams look choppy right now is, the preseason shorter than it used to be. Starters barely play if they play at all. It's like September has become the new preseason. Mm-hmm. And so many teams just don't look good looking at you, Denver Broncos. So I want to keep Bates on the roster. He's been so consistently productive over his 4 years in the NFL, never less than 90 tackles, more than 100 his first 3 years in the league. But I don't know if I want him in my starting lineup if I got any kind of viable alternative until we see some kind of signs of life from him. And, last week's comeback against the Cleveland Browns, who got a Brown to a new level against the Jets, that New York offense isn't really one that scares me. And your defensive backs, you'd prefer for them to be going up against an offense you have some confidence in, and I don't have a ton in the Jets, although Garrett Wilson did look good.
Yeah, at the Jets, they're really going to put Zach Wilson back in week 4. We'll see what happens this week. Maybe he'll have a setback. All right, well, let's sheer things up a little bit, and let's talk about players that have surprised pleasantly and whether they're going to keep it going. Buffalo's throwing a ton of investment at the defensive line, starting to pay off with Gregory Rousseau. Can he pay off this week against Tua Tagovailoa?
Yes, I loved Rousseau coming into the season. You look at what he did last year, 42 solo tackles and less than 50% of Buffalo's defensive snaps. I figured this year he was going to get a big boost in snaps with Mario Addison and Jerry Hughes gone. Hasn't gotten as big a boost as I expected because Buffalo is rotating their defensive linemen like crazy, but it's paying off. I mean, they're all over opposing quarterbacks. Rousseau's got a sack in each of his first 2 games. I think he's got 7 tackles through 2 games, which is not bad at all for a defensive lineman. I think he gets to Tagovailoa again this year, and I would not be surprised if by the end of the year, Gregory Rousseau is a DL1.
Yeah.
His stock is on the rise.
He's got the right situation, right? I mean, it's too bad the Super Bowl isn't played next week for Buffalo, although for Miami, it is kind of their Super Bowl this week.
Well, and they're up so big by halftime. Yeah. I mean, their pass rush in the second half is just pinning their ears back and ripping quarterbacks' faces off.
Against demoralized teams, too. It's the first 2 weeks, at least, it's painful. You just wanted the game to end after the third quarter. Bears games, as a fan, you might want them to end after the first quarter. But for your IDP player, Trevis Gipson, not Robert Quinn, Khalil Mack. I don't want to say they're not missing Khalil Mack because, I mean, what team wouldn't miss Khalil Mack? But Gibson's been doing something for the Bears, and he gets to chase after Davis Mills this week.
He might get another sack this week. I do think Trevis Gipson's going to come back to earth, if only because he's doing this. He's not getting a ton of snaps. His per snap productivity is off the charts right now, but that's going to be awfully hard to sustain moving forward. So he'd be a guy. I don't know that you're really going to be able to trade him because a lot of people they're going to Trevis who. So I don't know you're going to be able to trade him, but he's not a guy that I expect to maintain, top 10 numbers among defensive linemen. He'll be lucky, I think, to finish inside the top 20 for the season. Interestingly enough, at Fantrax, he has positional eligibility as a defensive tackle. So that boosts his value. Some of their positional eligibilities are a little odd.
Yeah, that's hey, it's IDP fantasy football. You take whatever advantages you can get.
Oh yeah,
and hey, I got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as a cornerback in one of my leagues.
Me too.
We talked about Foyesade Oluokun, and we were wondering how things were going to shake out Atlanta's linebackers, and it's Mykal Walker who's led the way. Is this just as simple as they're going to be on the field a lot? He's going to be on the field a lot. Keep him in your lineup.
I think it's mostly sustainable. He's looked good. He's making the defensive play calls. It's going to be interesting to see what happens here in a couple of weeks when Deion Jones comes off of IR. I don't think that Walker's role is really in jeopardy. I think he might lose a few tackle opportunities. I think if anyone's going to come off the field in favor of Jones, which I'm not saying with absolute certainty they're going to roll Jones out there.
Yeah,
it would probably be Rashaan Evans, because Evans is a liability in coverage and then some. So, Walker may fall outside that top 10, maybe in the LB2 territory, but the productivity is sustainable. And like you said, that Atlanta defense is probably going to be spending quite a bit of time on the field. And, look at the numbers that Oluokun and Jones, for that matter, were able to put up last year.
Yeah, there's some numbers coming elsewhere in the NFC South from Frankie Luvu, high energy linebacker. Actually had what probably would have been a pick six if he didn't have linebacker hands, in addition to what he's already done. Gets the Saints this weekend. Do we have another linebacker, an unlikely linebacker, but on these bad teams, these linebackers get a lot of opportunity?
The unlikeliest of IDP stars. I talked him up a little bit over the summer as a sleeper, but I didn't think he was going to. He's leading the Panthers in linebackers in defensive snaps. He's been on the field more than Shaq Thompson has. And he's making the most of it. 10 solos last week, 4 tackles for loss. Like you said, he is flying to the football. And the way he's playing, I don't see any reason why the Panthers would scale back his snaps. So if you were able to snag Frankie Luvu off the waiver wire after, say, week 1, he's a guy who's turning into an every week starter. And if he is available in your league, he should not be. He should be sitting on your roster if he's available.
Yeah, another one that if he's available. And in IDP fantasy football, the waiver wire, it takes on increased importance, I think, just because we can see injuries create IDP stars from the backups. And we can see these players who we know are in line with at least some increase in their role and prominence really become, in this case, for the 49ers, Gary, it almost feels like Talanoa Hufanga is their signature player on defense now. Can he become a signature player for our IDP teams?
I liked him coming into the season. I don't know that he's going to be able to maintain this level of production, but I do think he can at least stay in the DB2 conversation. Has played lights out the first couple weeks of the season. I expect that we're going to see the linebackers, because they've got such good linebackers, whether it's Dre Greenlaw or Fred Warner or even Azeez Al-Shaair. I think we're going to see those guys start eating into his production a little bit. But Hufanga, another guy who is probably available in not as many leagues as he was after the first couple weeks of the season he's had. But if you can go get him. And, I picked him up in a couple leagues, had to start him week 1 in one deep league where I already had some injuries at defensive back. And he's not coming out of my starting lineup now.
Let's move to the Texans. And again, if you need a reason to watch the Bears-Texans game, maybe having an IDP or 2 in it would help. Jonathan Owens at safety, putting up some numbers for them. Can it continue?
I have no idea, to be honest. You want to talk about, and every year, it's defensive back. So every year there's going to be a couple guys who are just going to come out of nowhere and put up big numbers. I want to say, because he's a deep safety, that the numbers probably aren't sustainable. But then you look at the number, 25 total tackles over the first 2 weeks of the season. That's a lot. Everyone was so high on Jalen Petrie coming into the year, and Owens is the guy who's putting up numbers. So I wouldn't be surprised if 3 weeks from now, he's sitting on 35 tackles after 25 in the first 2 weeks. But those kind of numbers, you have to pay attention. In leagues where I scooped him up. I don't know how confident I am starting him, especially this week, because the Bears' offense is just god awful, and the tackle opportunities aren't there. They can't generate any offense, so it's all 3 and outs. It's a bad thing for IDPs. People would think going up against a bad offense is good. Not really. You want an offense that can sustain some drives so that your defense sees some snaps, and that's just not happening. with Chicago right now. But Owens, ask me again in a month, and even then I might not know.
Right, like we like to say on the IDP show, 1 week's fluke, 2 weeks is a trend, and you want to catch those trends. You can catch all that stuff. It's really, I'm the lucky one. All my IDP teams are going to benefit from spending time with Matt Schauf, Draft Sharks, John Norton, and the Godfather, Gary Davenport, joining us on the IDP Blitz this year every Wednesday afternoon. Folks on the YouTube channel, like, comment, subscribe. We like helping you because you play the only real fantasy football, IDP fantasy football.